Hello and welcome to freephotoshop.com and this week's video tutorial looking at resampling versus resizing right here inside of Photoshop. Now the first question is, what's the difference between resampling an image and resizing it? Well, I'm going to open up a Photoshop document here called Resample versus Resize, which contains a brief explanation of both. Resampling is to amend the size of an image by increasing or decreasing the total number of pixels, and resizing is to amend the printing size and therefore the resolution of an image, but to retain the total number of pixels. So if you're wanting to reduce the file size of the image to send via email, for example, then you'll need to resample it, i.e. will need to lose pixels. If you need to hit a certain resolution value for printing the image, say 300 pixels per inch, then you'll be wanting to resize it. I'm going to minimize this image and open up a photograph entitled Welcome to Alberta, which is sitting here at the 25% view size, and from here on in I'm going to be focusing primarily on resampling rather than resizing. But if you did want more information on image size, view size, resizing and resolution, then you can check out my other tutorial entitled Image Size and Resolution, which is available right here at freephotoshop.com. Okay, I'm going to zoom in here to the W in Wild, and we're zooming in here at around about 700%, so we're magnifying the image to the ×7 mark. In other words, every pixel in this image is now occupying a block of 49 pixels on the monitor. And I want you to pay particular attention to the transition between the lettering and the actual sign. I'd say we've probably got an anti-aliasing effect of around about 2 or 3 pixels. And this is a 5 megapixel image, by the way, so it contains a total of approximately 5 million image pixels. I'm going to come up here to the image menu and select image size, which is going to bring up the image resize and resample controls. Now, you've probably already spotted the Resample Image option at the bottom here. And if this is ticked, then anything we do here is going to add or subtract pixels from the photograph. So just a quick refresher, if I turn this option off, then I lose the ability to amend the pixel dimensions. All I can do now is change the document dimensions and resolution. And we already know that as I increase one, I decrease the other. So here I'll enter a width of say 1000 centimeters, which will give me an image resolution of just over 6.5 pixels per inch. If I bump the resolution up to 600 pixels per inch, it decreases the document size to around an 11 by 8 centimeter image. And don't forget that these figures are only important if we're printing the photograph out. Whilst we're working on screen, we'll see no visual difference to the photograph whatsoever. And remember that if you want more information on this part of the dialog box, then look up my image size and resolution tutorial right here on freephotoshop.com. Okay, I'm going to hold down the Alt key on the PC, that's the Option key on the Mac, and click the Reset button. Now you can see that the Resample Image checkbox has been ticked, so everything we do now is going to affect the number of pixels inside the image. In other words, anything we do will resample the image. So you can see that if I increase the resolution to say 600 pixels per inch, we're going to be adding more pixels. If I decrease the size of the document, we're going to be subtracting pixels. We can also amend the number of pixels by directly typing a number into the entry box. So if I type 100 pixels into the width entry box, we're going to have an image that's 100 pixels wide, and because we've got the Constrain Proportions checkbox ticked, the height value will change in proportion to the width value. So in this case, the image will always maintain its 4:3 ratio. Okay, so let's talk a little more about resampling the image. I'm going to hold down the Alt key once again here on the PC, or the Option key over on the Mac, and reset the various settings. Now, as I said before, if we're resampling an image, we're either increasing or decreasing the number of pixels inside it. If we're increasing the amount of pixels, it's called upsampling. If we're decreasing the number of pixels, it's called downsampling. It's also handy to know that we have different methods of resampling an image inside this drop-down box here. and we'll look at these in more detail in just a few moments. First of all though, let's look at upsampling, or adding pixels to an image. The first rule here is to only upsample as a last resort. If the scanner or camera hasn't captured the detail, then Photoshop has to create them itself, and it does this by a method called interpolation. Now, interpolation is the act of predicting an unknown value between two known values. So it's taking two pixels within the image that are already side by side, it's measuring their values of hue, saturation and luminosity, and from the result it's creating a new pixel to slot between them. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to make sure that Resample Image is selected, and I'm going to change the interpolation to Bicubic Smoother. Then I'm going to change the unit of measurement to percentage, so we don't end up with an awkward measurement where Photoshop is carving pixels in half, for example. I'm going to enter a value of 300% to treble the size of the image. And the first thing that's going to be setting the alarm bells ringing, even before we press OK, is the image size. And if we go ahead and take a look at the file size of the image just here, we can see that it's shot up from just over 14 megabytes to nearly 130. Okay, I'm going to hit OK to accept that. Now it's going to take a second or two for the image to comply with the settings I've entered. Now you may have noticed that even though we're still viewing this at just over the 700% view size, we appear to be zoomed in a lot more. And that's because this image now has 3 times more pixels than it did before. I'm going to bring the navigator into view here so we can find that W where we were before. Okay. To get to that W onto screen, I've zoomed into a level of around about 200%, and you may be able to see that using the Bicubic Smoother option, we've indeed made the image smoother. And smoother unfortunately means that we've lost the sharpness that we had before. So in fact, if I zoom right in here to the top of the W, we can see that instead of having a few lines of transition like we did before, we've now got around 10 lines of pixels where the actual letter is transitioning into the sign. Now you may say that we could have gone ahead with the Bicubic Sharper image and applied that, but remember the pixels we're using to fill the gaps here are the product of Photoshop. So if we'd used the Sharper option, it would have just been more obvious to the viewer that the image has been stretched in order to fit on a larger printing surface. So this is always a good reminder to always shoot your digital camera at the best quality setting. So if you've got a 7 megapixel camera, then make sure you're shooting at 7 megapixels. If you're scanning images into your PC, then make sure that you're scanning to a resolution of at least 300 pixels per inch. And just as an example, the last time I scanned a batch of photographs into a scanner, I used a resolution of 600 pixels per inch. And from there I was able to downsample if I'd needed to. The last thing you want to do if you're scanning an image into your PC is to end up having to upsample it. Okay, I'm going to hit the F12 key on the keyboard to revert the image back to its original state. Then I'm going to find the W once again in the word wild, and this is where the navigator really comes in handy. Now I'm going to hit Ctrl-Alt-I here on the PC, or Command-Option-I on the Mac, to open up the image size dialog box once again. Now this time I'm going to downsample the document, and this may be something you end up doing quite a lot. It comes in really handy, for example, when you want to send a photograph via email. Instead of sending a 3 or 4 megabyte picture, you can downsample the image to say half a megabyte, which means it can be sent and received a lot quicker, among other things. Okay, I'm going to make sure that we've got the Resample Image option ticked. Then I'm going to change the method of resampling to Bicubic Sharper. Finally, I'm going to come up here to the pixel dimensions and change the measurement to percentage once again, and go for 50% this time. So this time we're going to be reducing the size of the file to approximately 3.6 megs, as you can see up here, and remember that this is the uncompressed file size. So we'll actually be able to make this image a lot smaller with the aid of JPEG compression once we go to save the file. I'm going to hit OK to accept all of those changes. Now I'm going to use the navigator once again to find the W on the screen, and this time we're zooming in a lot further than we did before. In fact, to get that W into view, I'm having to zoom in to around about 1000%, as you can see on the bottom left of the document pane. This time we've lost a lot of detail in the image, and that's because instead of creating new pixels, this time Photoshop has discarded them. It's done though with the Sharper option selected, meaning that we've kept as much detail as we possibly can. This is the equivalent to using the standard Bicubic algorithm and then adding a slight sharpen by using something like the unsharp mask. Okay, I'm going to hit Ctrl-Alt-I once again on the PC, that's Command-Option-I on the Mac, and this time we're going to look at the resampling methods we can use to improve the quality of up and down sampling. You can see that we've got a nearest neighbour option, Bilinear, Bicubic, Bicubic Smoother and Bicubic Sharper options. Now, what these 5 options allow us to do is decide the best calculation for creating and deleting pixels, depending on whether we're upsampling or downsampling. I'm going to hit the cancel button here and then minimize the Alberta image. Then I'm going to open up this image called Pixels. Now I'm just going to open up my layer comps palette here because I've created these examples as layer comps. Now I want you to think of this as being zoomed into an image we want to resample. Each one of these blocks represents a pixel, an image pixel that is. Now when we resample, Photoshop looks at each pixel and calculates its next move based on pixels around it. So if I click the nearest neighbour layer comp, you can see that Photoshop is only looking at one of the adjacent pixels, but more importantly it's going to be duplicating it rather than trying to work out an average based on a number of pixels. So here we're confined to just duplicating pixels inside the image, which is going to give us really jagged edges and the transitions are going to be really harsh. It's not going to give us very good results at all. So we're not going to be able to resample the majority of photographs by using the nearest neighbour option. There shouldn't be any surprises that this is the quickest method of resampling though, and I've heard that this can sometimes be useful for resampling screenshots, but generally you're going to want to stay away from this option. So next is the bilinear option. Here we've entered the realms of averaging. So what's happening here is that Photoshop is using an average of 4 pixels up, down, left and right of the pixel we've got here in the middle, the pixel we're trying to create or lose depending on what we're doing, and the pixel in the middle is going to have its value determined by an average of these 4 pixels. This is far better than nearest neighbour, but still not all that reliable. Next we have the default option, which is Bicubic, and this works just like bilinear, but instead of averaging 4 pixels, it's averaging 8 pixels, which drastically improves the quality of resampling. Finally, the other 2 options, Bicubic Smoother and Bicubic Sharper, are based on more specific calculations for resampling. Bicubic Smoother uses an average of 8 pixels, but is more geared towards upsampling, and Bicubic Sharper once again uses an 8 pixel average, but is more geared towards downsampling. As discussed earlier, the Sharper option uses a more complex algorithm for keeping downsampled images sharp and crisp. And just to confuse things, you may want to try downsampling a noisy image with the Bicubic Smoother option, which usually does a pretty good job of defeating noise inside the image. I guess the last thing you're going to want to do to a noisy image is sharpen it up, so the Bicubic Sharper option doesn't tend to be the best algorithm for doing that job. Okay, just to recap, avoid resampling unless there's no alternative. Use Bicubic Sharper to downsample and change the document size and resolution when going to print. Well, I hope you found this tutorial on freephotoshop.com to be helpful. Thanks very much for watching.